So vampires and tarot, it's quite beneficial, I think, to spend time looking at these together, which I've done in February. My reading prompt for February has been Fanguary. So for the first time ever, I've read Dracula, and I don't think I've ever been more surprised by a book and just how much I loved it. I have been delving into other vampire fiction as well as the month has gone on, and it has affected my moments of coming to tarot, and I wanted to share why. Discovering in here that Bram Stoker sent the manuscript of this to his publishers with the opening line of "This is true, a true story," then can we really afford to ignore the realm of the undead? I think not. So where do I think vampires come into our tarot practice? Well, tarot is very much the art of transformation, and a huge theme within vampire fiction is that idea of transformation, of going from the dead to the undead, whether that be spiritually, emotionally or physically. It's all in here. Also the mini deaths that we're trying to overcome with tarot. What do we need to let go of? What do we need to embrace? That is one of my standard tarot themes, and just within that theme there is very much the idea of bringing back to life, resurrecting. What do we want to resurrect in ourselves? What do we want to leave buried? It is very much part of tarot. We come to tarot with questions and problems, wanting answers and solutions or possible paths forward. And you see that in vampire fiction. There's very much the idea of burying it but then digging it back up again. We see it, I've read it over and over again in these books this month. So when I come to the tarot and I pull a card like that, because all of these vampire themes are in my mind, it affects the way I've been looking at tarot this month, and I've loved it. And then you've got the theme of power in the vampire books. Mankind and morality is really up against it when it comes to a power dynamic in all of this vampire fiction. Our heroes in the story, and I think we always try and cast ourselves as the hero, they're trying to hold on to human moral values and to find the right next step, but they are really up against it with wooden stake in hand to overcome ridiculous odds. We'll often come to the tarot with that theme in mind. I have often reached for the tarot when I couldn't think of any other right next best step forward, and I think here we see it with wooden stake in hand. Yeah. I love that the battles within our vampire fiction, it's really elemental. Not only can the vampires control the elements, and you see weather coming in and daylight and darkness and time and fog and mist, you've got the elements coming in, but you've also got the battle feeling elemental. So the stakes, they need to be wooden. You've got the natural elements coming in, like your protection is often within the natural elements. You've got the idea of sacred ground and earth coming in. We see that in the Pentacles. Our tarot is very elemental. In the books I've been reading, the boxes of earth are transported around the world to make the battle possible. We see some mouldy earth with corpses in, but we see sacred earth as well. Earth is part of the battle. We see water coming in, vampires not being able to cross moving water unaided, and holy water being used in the fight. Holy water bringing in hope, the hope of our star card. We see roses, things that you can grow. So we have that idea of being the gardener. I mean, how amazing that an army of undead vampires can be battled with white wild roses. The gardener in me just applauded at that, the power of the rose against an army of the undead. And white roses, and where do we see white roses? We see white roses in the tarot, literally being carried by death here, the flag with the white rose on. Like I said, reading vampire fiction, I am seeing it in my tarot deck. We see like silver bullets, silver coming in, like metal elements. Only silver swords can strike down a vampire, or silver bullets. We see silver swords in our sword. So whatever you're grasping, there is an elemental power that is there, both in the tarot and also in books about vampires that can't go out into the sunshine and hold their power, whereas we can. It is definitely a fight against good and evil, where we're asked to confront our own humanity and find our strength, and to overpower what seems like impossible odds, but often using elemental powers. That's in the tarot. There is definitely, as well, in all of these books, a battle between sort of seduction, desire over morality, a desire that, if followed, can lead you into heartbreak, and then you might need a silver sword to pierce a vampire heart to get you out of that. Whereas human morality might lead you down a different path. How funny, we've got silver swords in this card, and yet we've got wooden stakes in this card with a castle behind. Having spent the last 2 weeks solidly reading vampire fiction, I see those differently now, and it's just added a whole new element, another layer to layer into my real life tarot associations, and I've loved it. And of course, our vampire fictions are full of symbols. We've got crates of earth with crosses being drawn all over them, the crucifix, and that idea of what is sacred, symbols of sacredness to protect you or to bring answers in. It is also a very symbolic battle that we go into when we are fighting vampires, and you can't help but see it when you get to cards like this, with symbols being held up, the cross down his red cloak, the keys, answers. We're always looking for keys to overcome symbolically in these tales, and we see it here, a cross within a sacred space. And of course, the tarot is full of different symbols and symbology that can hold meaning. Like now, the white rose, I put this combination of jewelry on this morning thinking, oh my gosh, the white rose of protection with a drip of blood, that battle of humanity, the red blood within us, our life force, protecting our own life force. Immediately, it's not only affecting my tarot practice, it's affecting me getting dressed in the morning. I think that is the power of reading story and letting story soak into us. We create a whole new layer, and I think that's what brings the magic in life, which is why I've wanted to keep story and books on what is effectively a tarot channel. It's because it all layers in. At some point, even if you don't see it straight away, you will spot the layer. It will spill over when you pull a card. It will spill over when you go and choose jewellery. Have I ever worn these two necklaces together before? No. Will I now? Yes. These layers affect us, and I think that's why tarot is so wonderful, because it is so multi-layered. It holds layers just by itself. Start to add in your own layers and you start to find magic and synchronicities everywhere, and that's why we should vampire our tarot, or look at the books you're reading. If they're not vampire books, are there any layers there? Is there a new layer that you can create to add depth into whatever practice you've got? I think within vampire fiction as well, we also have really big themes of loneliness and isolation. I think we find that in the gothic settings. We have isolated castles. Dracula's castle is one of the most awe-inspiring settings that is, I think, embedded in all of us, whether we've read the book or not. The castle on top of the rocky mountain, surrounded on three sides by cliffs. If you haven't read this book and you don't know that setting as part of a novel, you may know that setting emotionally, where you've got nowhere else to go, where you can just look out of turret windows down at the rocks below and there is nowhere left to go and your doors are locked. I think in that way we all know what it's like to be Jonathan Harker approaching Dracula's castle alone. We've been Jonathan Harker emotionally, even if you haven't read his story. Very many aspects of vampire fiction, I think, that do explore that feeling of isolation, and we get that in the tarot too. We get walking away into a barren landscape where we don't know what's around the corner. We don't know what door the castle is going to open up and let us out. We just know that we need to find the way out. We see it in the idea of being ostracized out of society. In these books, it's not only the undead that have left society, but also we see it in the women fighting. They have to step out of societal roles. We see it in the insane asylum prisoner locked up because everybody thinks they've gone crazy. There is an idea of opening ourselves up to these bigger ideas and these possibilities of what might be out there. There is a loneliness sometimes and an ostracization. We see that in the tarot. We see the person tied up having to change their perspective, just like our protagonist in the tower in this book. We see the fact that sometimes that is a lonely journey, or that sometimes something more normal can come in and push us into Dracula's castle, or make us seek the darkness of a tomb to regroup ourselves. We see those themes in the tarot as well as in vampire fiction. We also see bands of humans coming together to fight against incredible odds. You see that idea of our humanity often being greater when we come together, how we can do good when we come together, and how we can succeed in life more when we come together. But this card also reminds me of the three women in Dracula's castle as well. There is a double-edged sword, and we get that when we reverse our cards. We see all elements of this humanity working for good. The desire to overcome a family curse and a wonderful family, or a family of the undead getting stronger with each generation. It's all there, depending on whether we turn our card upside down like a bat. So I think there is a power to opening yourself up to letting some vampire fiction into your tarot to really shine a spotlight on the humanity that we possess and the lack of humanity that we sometimes come up against. Vampire Your Tarot will give you an idea that no matter what the odds, you can overcome. Our tarot should be putting the power back into our own hands. It hands us the joy and the wooden stakes to overcome. And I think that if we need a silver sword and we are up against it, the tarot can bring that into us. Sometimes our biggest enemy is ourselves, and the tarot and vampire books do talk about that ability to begin again, to start again, to draw a line, to step onto new sanctified ground and to not invite any more vampires in. It is really a way of giving power back to ourselves, to unlocking the chains and putting silver chains on the vampire. And it doesn't even take silver chains. It can take something as simple as a white rose to be able to beat the undead and to take the leap and start again. The white rose is there. So they are great themes to work with that are already in the tarot that you can amplify and shine the sunlight on by reading vampire fiction. And I've sorted through my tarot decks and I've got some beautiful pairings to show you these elements and these themes coming into your tarot practice with some fabulous decks. So I'm going to turn the camera around and I'm going to show you the decks for these themes. First of all, of course, we have to go with the Tarot de la Nuit. So the Tarot of the Night, and this is just so perfectly vampire themed, this deck. You've got the moons on the back and you can see it is your quintessential beautiful vampire death. Of course, you've also got themes of youth and aging within vampire fictions. Vampires, of course, not aging, and I think I can forgive this deck being like a beautiful deck because of that, but it can really bring up some ideas of around concepts of aging. Now, I thought with the Tarot de la Nuit, what I like to do in my spreads is to use two tarot together. I normally use over a week 2 tarot and I use an oracle. So there's always normally 3 decks out on my desk. But I tend to like a pictorial tarot, which Tarot de la Nuit is, with a more sort of pippish deck. And this is a Fournier deck. This is Tarot for Vol, is it? No, I'm not sure how to say it. But this is much more pippish. And I think these two do go together really beautifully. These are the backs. I love these 2 decks together. I really do love that idea of working with a deck that is pictorial and alongside another one that is way more pippish. In this deck you've got the courts and you've also got the majors are all pictorial, but I think that's nice to get another one of those thrown in as well. Look, you've got the idea of masks in both of these decks. If I pick that card up, can you see you've got the masks? I think vampire fiction as well does have that theme of the hidden. Like it's a world that's hidden. It's hidden by night. It's hidden in tombs in the day. Is that real theme of the hidden? I think that's a beautiful theme that the tarot is really, really useful for exploring as well. But you've got your symbols as well. You've got the natural world coming in as well. And I just think these two are just a lovely pairing visually to explore it. I think there is a colour palette as well that kind of works with these two. Look at that. It's just so brilliant. And look at that. Plus I think vampire fiction and the gothic, it's just so damn beautiful. You've got that sort of gothic spiritual symbolism, you've got the crosses, you've got the crucifixes, you've got the wild landscapes, you've got the castles and the crypts, and oh, it's damn beautiful. And you've got like roses as your bullets. I mean, for goodness sake, how incredible is that to be able to fight with baskets of white roses? So it's aesthetically beautiful, as is our tarot. I think our tarot is so wonderful to work with because it's beautiful. So many people I've heard describe a new tarot deck as a mini art exhibition in a box, and it's part of it. It's part of the beauty of tarot is that aesthetic quality to it, which we get in the gothic as well. So I think those two are a lovely pairing. Now if I was going to put a oracle with that, because I always like to pull a couple of oracle cards, I think the Primrose and Prose oracle deck, it's kind of got this kind of undead feel about it. You can see there this kind of strange rabbit, what is it, a rabbit rat with mushrooms growing on it and blank eyes. Very odd, very otherworldly. It is quite a dark deck, I think. I mean, immediately you see this one, is that bird does not look alive. So I think immediately you've got that element of the undead or something else going on that you can't quite figure out. And again, I think the colour palette here just works beautifully. And of course these have got this absolutely gorgeous foiling on them. I mean, it is cutesy as well, but the more I've worked with it, I bought it because it was cutesy, but I think it's cutesy in an undead way. Can you be cutesy in an undead way? I think you can. I think you can. And of course, a lot of these creatures, they feature in our shape-shifting vampires. Don't forget, our vampires are shape-shifting. We see snakes, and we see bees, and we see insects, and we see wolves and wild dogs. Just a great oracle for that. Isn't it beautiful? And I think with the Tarot de la Nuit, it's just absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. So those are my first three that I think really capture the essence of vampiring tarot. I honestly think as well that colour palette plays a huge part in anything aesthetically gothic, and definitely vampire, or you've got that idea of the red and the black. It's very much a theme inside many of these gothic tales, as you can see by this cover. There it is, that red and that black. And of course colour takes on significance in the battle. You've got silver, you've got colours of white, all coming into play in the battle. So colour is really important, and it made me think of tarot as colour, which are these very abstract art pieces. This is by the absolutely incredible Ethel Colquhoun. So this is tarot as colour. It's an incredible deck. But I think the abstract style also makes me think of splashes of holy water and splashes of blood, which is very much part of the vampiric novels. So I put these together. So this is Tarot de la Nuit still, but with tarot as colour, and oh my goodness, this just blew me away. I was not expecting this to be a combination that I would gasp at, and it really did. There is just something, these two together, when you add in that other layer of vampiric themes, and I just love it. And I think it encourages creativity, this combination. We see in the battles of the vampires, to overcome evil, which is very much a theme of vampire novels, good versus evil. To overcome evil, we see our protagonists having to really get creative. There is that idea of making do, never giving up, going to the very limits of your creativity, which is what this deck really pushes the boundaries of. This is about really going to the very ends of your creativity. So I think it kind of works its way in with that, plus it adds in these vibrant splashes of colour, which could be anything really, when we're coming at this from a vampire themed idea. And I think coming at this with that additional layer this month, because it is so very much in my head, it just works so well. So I had to share that. So I think already we can see some tarot themes coming in alongside our vampire themes. So you've got decks like this that I've just shown that really kind of embody the characters, vampire characters. They're the more obvious vampire decks, but you've also got that theme of like shape-shifting animals. I also think that decks like the Wild Unknown could come into that sort of strange depictions of animals, because our vampires do shapeshift a lot into different animals. They escape and then they cause problems by shapeshifting into different animals. And you've also got that idea of colour and splashes of colour and blood coming into the mix. So you can come at these different themes from with different decks. You don't have to have a collection of vampire decks. I'm not saying with this video run out and buy a collection of vampire decks, not at all. You could come at it just purely through colour or purely through your animal decks if that's what you've got. There is a way of adding these ideas in. The next 3 decks I'm going to share are more along that idea of colour, like that red and black, the red and the black, very, very Dracula-esque. So I've got the Path of Horror Tarot, and this is relatively new to me. It was recommended, I think, because I've been searching vampire fiction, and it was only $6.99, and I was like, what? I checked, it wasn't a counterfeit, and it's just a super cheap deck with a linen finish, and I thought, oh my goodness me, okay, let's just give this a go, because I've been looking for a tarot deck to play alongside this Oracle of the Witch. So these are on the darker end, I think, of decks. Like, they're kind of the decks that you would see somebody pull out in the Halloween deck videos. I mean, look at that. That is very much like body parts. That does feature in Dracul. You've got body parts, but you've also got this incredible vampiric colour scheme, which I think is just perfect. So you could literally do it just with colours. But this is very much more the vampire striding down the road in a cloak. This feels like. So the Path of Horror Tarot, I don't know if you can see, can you see the texture of the cards? Is this linen finish to it? This is pictorial all throughout. So I was looking for a pip deck that would work with it, and to be honest, I didn't like this paired with pip decks. While I'm talking, why don't I flick? That would be a really good idea, wouldn't it? But I loved the way these two work together. I was sad that I couldn't find a pip deck that I liked with it. You can see this isn't really vampire, this is just purely horror. But and this is witch, which is not horror. It's like the wonderful elements of a witchcraft practice. But why have I put them together for vampiric decks? It is that colour. It is that colour, and it does bring that idea of expanding your mind to the possibilities of other options, of symbols coming into play, of colour coming into play, good versus evil, if you're asking questions of your tarot like that, or when you're in a battle against some sort of evil and you need some answers for it, or you need to push your practice in a certain way. It's here in these two decks. But because for my week ahead spread I do normally work with two tarot, I went looking through my decks, and you will not believe the tarot that I stumbled across that I thought works really well with it. It is not a pip deck. In fact, it is absolutely the opposite. This is the large Enchanted Tarot, which is all kind of textile applique art. There's such a lot of detail in this deck. You would not think it would go with the detail in this deck, but let me put them next to each other and I will show you. So these two together, I was surprised. I was really surprised by how much I liked them, and then I thought, why is it feeling more vampire-ish now I've added this deck in as a theme? Why is it suddenly feeling like I am about to come across a vampire battle? And I think it's because a lot of the vampire fiction, Dracula in particular, is Victorian. Even like modern day vampire stories are often set in that kind of old Victorian setting. Not all, I know, but this sort of setting, and like with Victorian households trying to save their women who are fainting. It's got that Victorian-esque feel to it, which I think we find in this deck here. It made me realise that like Victorian style decks can come into play if you don't have any vampire decks. I mean, you might absolutely hate some of the imagery in this horror deck. I know it's not for everybody, but you might have some beautiful sort of Victoriana decks like this that can bring in that idea of the vampiric sort of battle. And I think it does it so well. So that was a surprise pairing that once I saw them next to each other, I just thought I really love them together. So colour as a way to come at this theme, or Victoriana, it's all there, and bringing this theme in through tarot decks without necessarily being too obvious with the straight vampire deck. So thinking about Victoriana and that kind of feel of the Victorian, I thought about this vintage Wisdom Oracle by Victoria Mosley. You can see straight away that has a feel of the Gothic novel or vampiric fiction. I also have another Fournier deck. These little Fournier decks are brilliant if you want sort of darker pippish decks. This is the Alchemy England Tarot, which I really love. It is a darker deck, but it's brilliant for this sort of theme. And then of course the Hush Tarot, again it's got that kind of patterned Victoriana. You can kind of see it in the edges of the boxes here. But this does bring in that feeling of the undead. It is an unsettling deck, I think, the Hush Tarot. I've heard other people say, oh, the undead eyes, and it feels like a zombie deck, but it has that feeling of the undead. So I thought, let's just try these two tarot next to each other with this as the oracle combination. Let's try this combination with that feeling of the Victorian in there. So straight away I am loving these decks together. So this is the Hush Tarot with these backs. That is the Oracle, and this is the Alchemy England Tarot. Look at those backs together. I think they work absolutely brilliantly. So for tarot, I've got the more pippish deck. This is more pippish than this one. This is pictorial throughout. This one isn't, and again, look, you've got roses, which I just think are perfect. And I think this oracle in the centre as well, I think the colour palette is absolutely beautiful. And it does feel like you've stepped into either a Victorian parlour that is next door to some sort of weird church or crypt, and where there are strange goings on. It's definitely got that feeling, and you can see what I mean by the Hush Tarot. It does feel like it's full of something that shouldn't be moving anymore, but it is. I love it for that. This as well being pippish, it brings in that idea of the elements, like that, those sort of battle components of a vampiric battle that are elemental. So I like that with like the roses and the pentacles and swords. I love it. But I think this is fabulous. So again, none of these are vampire decks, none of them at all, but you've got elements, you've got animals and the undead, you've got that idea of a Victorian parlour, like going back in time, or like a crypt. It's all there within the cards. So again, I love it, really love it. Snakes wrapping around silver swords, very much a scene from Crone, which I've just read, where Bram Stoker himself is locked in a tower trying to survive the night. That isn't a spoiler because that's on the blurb. And at one point snakes start to come in and he uses silver swords to get them back out again. You've got silver swords again over here. Release that idea of being born again, or being released from life and becoming immortal. Great themes, sort of gothic settings here. Real gothic settings. You've got the gothic arches mirroring each other there. Again, snakes wrapping round roses and flowers again. You've got cups, this time looking like they're full of blood. Fabulous imagery that I think just works together perfectly. So I have another 3 here to kind of pull the theme in. I'm going to try the Bug Tarot, because we see in the vampire fiction vampires shape-shifting into bugs, or even controlling insects to defeat and attack and escape. But it is all set within sort of sacred space. We're never that far away from a church or a ruined cathedral or a crypt somewhere or a graveyard. There is that idea of the sacred, which is laced through the horror of vampire fiction. So here I've got the Black Madonna, the Shrine of the Black Madonna deck, which is a very pricey indie deck, I know, but it just kind of has that feel to it, alongside the Bug Tarot, which I really love. Of course, this is incredibly detailed. This is pippish, so I thought these two just might be amazing together. And look at that straight away. Wow, is all I can think to say. So I am really liking these two together straight away. So again, we've got literally visually represented here that vampiric theme of the consecrated against the unconsecrated. So you've got the idea of a ground teeming with bugs to a sacred space and an altar. Very in keeping with all the ideas that held within that battle of good against evil. Consecrated versus unconsecrated. What's sacred to you? What isn't sacred? What are you willing to fight through storms for? Which we get in all of these novels. so it kind of throws a huge spotlight straight away on those themes that you might want to be working with tarot. If you get to a point where you really need some help with some sort of good versus evil battle that you're going through, and you're fighting for something that's sacred for you, and you want some answers, what a perfect way of doing it. You've already got decks that are screaming that at you between these ideas. And I think that's what the tarot is so good for. For me, I know that at points, really pertinent readings have been at the point where I just don't know where else to turn, where, you know, I just can't think of the next step. And tarot is so good for opening that up for you. And look at that, that couldn't be more perfect. We have literally opened the crypt lid there, and the insects are crawling out. So perfect. Now, what might go with that as an oracle deck? I did think about the moon, because the moon is another huge theme. That idea of the action happens when the moon comes out, and can you survive that time when the moon is out and make it to daylight? This is just like a really cheap one that I found on eBay, and there are moon mantras. Now, can I fit this in anywhere? Let's try. Might be if you are in a space where you're using decks like this for like huge battles that you might be going through, that a moon mantra deck alongside it just might be what you need. And I know unicorns and moons are not necessarily vampiric, but you can get the idea of bringing the theme in without bringing it in really obviously. And I think this is beautiful. I would very happily spend a few weeks working with these together, even though on first glance it might not be like an obvious pairing. So I think if you've got moon decks as well, bring those in. Animal decks, moon decks, anything sort of sacred in there. It's perfect for this theme that we're looking at. I love those three together. Look at that. Now, I don't have a Buffy the Vampire Slayer deck, unfortunately, but what I do have is this Fall for Tarot deck by our very own Rumour Haven, who is a Buffy aficionado, and she made her very own deck, which is absolutely wonderful, in homage of the character Spike the Vampire. And I think Spike's character arc was very much that idea of a power battle, because of course he was a vampire who was chasing after their soul again and working with Buffy. And I've got no idea why these aren't mixed, but never mind. So we've got Spike the Vampire, whose story is interlaced with power and claiming power and giving power away. For me, when I think of power, I think of my cronehood, stepping into the power of this part of my life, being an older woman. I also think of my spiritual path, which is also elemental, and of course Tarot of the Crone jumped into my mind, and I thought that these two might work really nicely together. Of course, aesthetically, you've got the black that is going to make that work so fantastically. Look at this. So that idea of power dynamics, this is a real power dynamic deck, I think. Look at that. Look at the stitching and the lines that look like they're stitched in here. Yeah, I thought these two might work really well, where the Shadow of Swords with the Knight of Cups with the blood on there. I think this would be a very, very powerful combo. I love both of these decks separately as well, but I think they could really work. There is that real sense of bringing power into the mix and where we get our power from, like protecting our life essence basically, which really vampiric fiction is very much about that. It's about renewing and protecting our life essence. Wow, love it. Absolutely love these two together. I thought for an oracle, which also works as a tarot of course, the Outgrow Yourself oracle might work, because in this you've got that idea of power and also of the elements coming in. I think the natural elements is more part of vampire fiction than I've realised, and like the power inherent within them. Like I say, that idea of battling a vampire with a white rose, I love, and you kind of get that feel in this deck. So I thought these might work together. Again, you've got that aesthetic quality of the large amounts of black and the black edging in the cards, which I think aesthetically brings them all together. But you've also got like a real power dynamic feel. It, if anything feels like life essence, it's these cards. I hope I am making sense. I'm making sense to me, so I hope there's at least one other person out there that I am also making sense to. But wow, these three are something else. I love these three. Gosh, look at this. Yeah, these three I think are going to be my next go-to three to work with, because these three I really love together. So that is Tarot of the Crone, Fall for Tarot, which is Rumour's deck, and Outgrow Yourself. Okay, another three which I absolutely could not leave out of the equation. Les Vampires, the Oracle, which is by Lucy Cavendish. It's got the artwork of Jasmine Beckett Griffith. Of course, how could I leave this out of mix? I just couldn't, could I? So I thought, what would go with Les Vampires? And I thought a tarot, my pictorial tarot, I'm going to go with Tarot of Mystical Moments. This is kind of otherworldly. It's got that Victoriana feel as well, which I think is perfect. The collage images are strange, aren't they? They kind of show the possibility of other worlds. It's the mystical moments and opening our mind up to the possibility of mystical moments and this strange collaged world where different elements that shouldn't go together are brought together. Well, that's very vampiric in its theme. It's the bringing together of strange elements and trusting that that's okay. And wow, look at those two decks together immediately. That works for me. But if I wanted to throw another tarot deck into the mix, I really wanted to bring the Botanica tarot in, because of that kind of Victoriana feel, and that Victoriana feel of plants and, you know, the great Victorian flower decoration or greenhouse. That is very gothic, isn't it? If you're going to go into a greenhouse and you want it to feel gothic, this is how it should look. So I just thought these three might work. So of course, this being flowers and this being pictorial, this almost feels more pippish. And then you've got the straight up vampire element of this. Absolutely gorgeous. Now for me, that works so well. So what I would do, I would pull tarot cards one beneath the other, and then say a couple of oracle cards for the week as well. But I think that brings in that feeling of the Gothic and the Victorian Gothic in particular, which I think is very laced in amongst our vampire fiction. And I think on this spiritual path, we are open to other worlds. We are open to the idea of like working with plants, for example, to overcome some big spiritual or energetical or even physical things that ail us. We're open to that. As is vampire lore, it's open to that supernatural and expansive power of literally the white flower. Literally, like, put a white rose at a door and it will stop the creature from coming in. And I think you see that here. You see strange other worlds, you see vampire lore, and you see the power of a possible other world to work with. So we're going to come full circle, and we're going to finish where we began, with the Rider-Waite deck. You don't need a big deck collection to be able to do this. In fact, I think sometimes all of these decks can kind of bury the themes and the layers that we want to use. We don't want to get wrapped up in, well, we can't see the wood for the trees because of all the decks we've got. So to come back to our Rider-Waite deck, and just to add something simple in, like say these 50 plants that heal deck. This actually isn't an oracle, but I do use it as an oracle, and I do bring like that power of nature into the mix. This deck is incredibly cheap, and but it's beautiful. It's so beautiful. You've got on the back just a breakdown of whatever plant it is on the front, and within that breakdown there is always something that can act like an oracle message, I've found. So it isn't necessarily an oracle deck, but it can be used definitely as an oracle. And I just thought, let's pair this just with our bog standard Rider-Waite deck, and just to see those themes come out. I mean, immediately you've got that idea of dissection. In this 50 plants that heal, you've got plants that are dissected, and you see that in vampire fiction. There are morgues and there are dissected bodies and there are body parts. That, I think, is also, it also feels, I don't know why it feels Victorian. Why does it feel Victorian? It's probably linked to the sort of Victorian plates of flowers when they were first studying plants back in the Victorian age. But I think it lends itself beautifully to bringing in that feel of vampires, even though we're doing it with plants. You know, like, what is sacred to you? What will you grab onto? And like, what, let's dissect that out. What will protect you when the moon comes out and the sun goes away? What will you grab your silver sword for? What is it that will protect you the most? What is sacred to you? Where is there a balance between, say, desire and morality? Where is that desire to come in? You can see this in the cards. What grand quest will you go on with wooden stake in hand? And where is your bravery? You can ask yourself these questions, which all bring into play that Victorian and vampiric theme. I mean, look at Sorrow. That literally looks like Count Dracula when you come at it from this lens. Like, what turns you into Dracula? And the dandelion, that blowing wishes out into the world. Where can you begin to blow your wishes back out? Your wishes to cross the river. Of course, vampires can't cross running water without help. Doesn't that add a whole new dimension into looking at that card? Can you see we've gone back to basics here, and already there are themes jumping out that bring Dracula into the mix. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed looking at the decks as well. Like I say, this doesn't need to be about rushing out to buy every vampire deck you see. It can be done so beautifully with something as simple as this. And I think Vampire Your Tarot for a month. Get into reading some vampire fiction, bring that in and just see what happens. Join my reading prompts if you want. We're still in February, you've still got time. And let's just have fun. Let's just create some layers in life of all the things that we're loving to add more into our walk. The layering is where it's at, and for that I love this practice. And as I said, that you've got flowers mirroring angel wings. So guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.